My name's Margaret Pratt. I'm Roger Pratt's widow. He died in January 2014 after an attack on our boat in Vieux, St. Lucia. I met Roger in sort of spring, summer 1971. I was 17, he was 19. He had a very large smile. He really, and a very infectious laugh. Those are the things that, that live with you. Yeah. He was a great guy. He was a really, really practical person. There was nothing that he couldn't turn his hand to. He lived to sail. We had a succession of boats, and the building up to a boat that was capable of crossing the Atlantic. Roger thought very long and hard about what sort of boat he wanted, and he ended up thinking he wanted a steel boat because there's this irrational fear that you might hit a container in mid-Atlantic and it would, if you caught a corner, it would just hole you, and a glass fibre boat would be, you'd just sink without trace. He knew it was irrational, but he felt a steel boat would be rather safer than a glass fibre boat, which is why we bought Magnetic Attraction. It was a home from home. There's a season to cross the Atlantic. You cross the Atlantic sort of November, December time, arriving in the Caribbean just before Christmas. That's when the trade winds are most apt, and you tend to leave from the Canaries. So we planned going backwards. We set off from Lowestoft. We visited we visited friends en route, and some of those friends were places. So old friends, places that we'd visited before, we really liked, and hopped down fairly slowly. I remember being trapped in Falmouth for quite a long while, waiting for the winds to be suitable to go down to Spain. We were quite early going through Portugal, so we ended up going just around to the Algarve, and then the final sprint was down to Lanzarote from the coast of Spain. We were planning for somewhere between 25 and 30 days, although we did the crossing in the end in about 23 days. My brother-in-law and his daughter-in-law, Brian and Lucy, went with us. So it was a family party. There were some very difficult moments, particularly when the generator went down. He'd made a conscious decision not to take some spares for the generator, and so we weren't able to make water. So we were on short rations. Lucy was in charge of rationing water for the day and washing. So when it poured with rain, everyone dived out and tried to have a shower under the rain. But it didn't happen as often as we hoped. All sorts of memories. We'd been expecting to see the Martinique. And it's like whenever you make landfall, you see the clouds in the distance, and you know that the islands or the mainland is coming. And it's funny, you know it must emerge at some point. And I suddenly looked over and I saw it, and I pointed to Lucy. So she was the one who was able to say, "Land ahoy!" And that was our first sight of the hills of Martinique, and then that would be sort of mid-afternoon. So we arrived about 9 o'clock at night. I think we dropped anchor in easy anchorage. Had a glass of champagne, saved specifically for the purpose. We were there for Christmas. Yes, my sister and my nephew joined the party, so we were 6 of us aboard over Christmas, just anchoring in Martinique, swimming with turtles. Yes, it was lovely. Yes, you could see St. Lucia. So we clocked out of Martinique and then just sailed across effectively a straight down to Rodney Bay in St Lucia. It would have been either the day before New Year's Eve or New Year's Eve, after the others had flown back to the UK. We met Zena and Henrik, who we'd been sailing with all the way across from Falmouth. They arrived in Martinique, and they'd gone earlier to St Lucia because we had guests for Christmas. And so we met up with them, and we all had New Year's Eve together in Rodney Bay. We left Rodney Bay and we went down to Marigot Bay for my birthday, where we had supper, my birthday supper with Zena and Henry, and we had a lovely day there. It was super. Marigot Bay is just beautiful. And then from there we went down to Soufrière, just under the Piton. We went diving there, and we did a lot of walking around. And then from there we went on to Vieux. On the 17th of January we were moored offshore at Vieux. So we went ashore. We had a day exploring. We'd left the boat moored up, the outboard dinghy moored up. Paid someone to keep an eye on it. We'd got walked around most of the day. We'd had lunch. We came back. We had some supper on the boat. We went to bed normal sort of time, 10:30, and our cabin is in the stern. So presumably the boat was in darkness, so people would think we were asleep. But because we were under the stern, when we heard people moving about above us, and obviously the first thing you do is to go and have a look. And I remember saying, "Be careful." I remember Roger climbing up, and I was behind him, and just saying, "Go away, just go away." And then everything goes a bit blurry. The next thing I know is that I can remember him fighting one of the young men right on the stern, and I think as I came out, a guy just caught me around in a sort of a half Nelson like that, and so I was sort of being held down like this while this guy just sort of another guy just pummeling me. Just trying to, where's the fucking money? Just beating me up. He had a mask on, and I recall saying, "What have you got that for?" and pulling it off. So there was definitely forensic evidence. I also was trying to punch him back. I was kicking and punching him back. They wanted to get past me into the cabin to try and rob us. And I had my foot out to try and stop that happening. And in the end, they got past me. One of the guy that had been beating me up got past me, got down into the cabin, found my handbag, found my computer. And at that point, someone said something in patois, and I don't know what happened. I didn't understand what was being said, but with hindsight, I think Roger must have gone into the water. So they just dropped everything, and all of them jumped over the side and swam to the shore. So they left the boat that they'd come, this little boat that they'd stolen, they left it tied up. My computer was in there. And I remember sitting there thinking, well, where's Roger? And calling. And then there's that awful moment when you realise you're on the boat alone. So I dropped the dinghy into the water in case he was swimming, and then I called Mayday on the VHF radio, and the Vieux people it's a small port, responded immediately, as did 2 or 3 other boats. So they came across to see what was happening. A couple of other, there was a big super yacht also moored there. So a search was instituted, and they found his body within sort of 10 minutes or so. I heard it on the radio. You know, we found a male floating face down. Anyway, the people in Odessa, which was the super yacht, did absolutely all they could. They picked him up, took him there, did the resuscitation, CPR, that sort of stuff. And then by then there was an ambulance on the dock, so the people from the super yacht took me ashore, and then they took Roger ashore, and the ambulance took me to the hospital, which is near Vieux. And we were taken straight into the emergency room, and during the journey they'd said, the ambulance man kept working on Roger. And anyway, I saw the consultant, and he said, "But this man is dead." And so they took his body away, and then they tried to patch me up. By the time I got back to the boat, it would be about 3:30 in the morning, and the police had arrived. The police were all over the boat, so the scene of crime was very protected very early, and they took lots of prints from the companionway steps, blood samples, all sorts. And they said, "Well, we want you to move the boat." So this was 3:30 in the morning. I'd been beaten up. I said, "Absolutely not. I'm not doing it at this time of the morning." I was on my own as well, of course. So they said, "Well, what do you want to do?" So I said, "Well, I'm going to go back to my home." It wasn't locked up or anything. And the policewoman, I shall never forget it, she sat and stood there and said, "You're tougher than you look." Which, of course, I now think, well, what did I look like? Well, I know what I looked like, They'd mopped up some of the blood, but, I wasn't a pretty sight. So I said to the police lady, I would like to go back to my home, and it would be very nice, I'd like someone to accompany me to spend what's left of the night on board boat. "Oh no, we couldn't possibly do that." The police took me back, and I stopped at one of the other boats who'd come to help search for Roger, and Jen Buttery came and spent the night with me. We just bunked down, both of us, for what remained of the night. And it was very generous of her, because again, if the police weren't prepared to come and support me, a fellow cruiser was. They pulled out all the stops over sort of the first 36, 48 hours. Bearing in mind this is a small island, they threw a lot of resource at it. I don't have any experience of this sort of thing, but I would have said it was done quite well in terms of the crime scene. They were very keen to take me to a place of safety. They put me up in a hotel up in Rodney Bay near Castries. A policeman was detailed to take my statement, and over the next 2-3 days we worked hard on my statement. The friends Sina and Henrik took the boat up to a secure compound, the police's compound up in Castries, so that again the crime scene could be examined in more detail. I met with, I had Foreign and Commonwealth support from the consular office in St Lucia, and she was extremely supportive. In fact, the Foreign and Commonwealth office really responded well. I think the initial response was very good. I was told that and I heard the instruction given that the forensics should be sent off island to make sure there was no argument about the forensics. And that was the quote. But subsequently, you know, I've discovered that the forensic evidence was all contaminated. The police did a great job in terms of identifying the people who they believe carried out the attack. They arrested 5 and charged 4, who are still in prison as we sit and talk today. And they all have public attorneys, so they are all legally represented. They have all confessed, although there are those confessions, I understand, are being challenged through the courts. But here we are 3 years on, and really it's nowhere. Well, you keep getting dates, but there are continuing delays in the trial. I felt it was an entirely straightforward process. There was strong forensics, there was confession evidence. There seemed to me no reason why there should be any delay in bringing these people to trial. Even acknowledging the fact that the St Lucia system is going to be it's very similar to the UK, but it isn't going to be the same because it's an independent country, and that's quite right and proper. But there seemed to be no impediment to bringing forward the case. I think that the judicial system is under-resourced. I think that there is a fairly Byzantine system of trial, pre-trial hearings, all sorts. But the pearl that really has meant that I wanted to talk about this is the fact that both the forensic evidence has been found to be contaminated, I understand, and also the fact that now the confession evidence is coming into dispute. And I see no signs that this is going to be resolved. If it isn't going to be resolved for me, it's certainly not going to be resolved for other people in St Lucia. I'd like to see things speeded along, not just for me and not just for Roger, but also for the 4 young men who are lying festering in the correctional facility in St Lucia. Delay isn't in anybody's interest. We need to get it resolved. I think a satisfactory outcome is a timely prosecution that addresses the facts, that addresses the confession evidence. I would like an apology and a better understanding of what went wrong with the forensics and what would be addressed going forward to try and make sure other people aren't in the same situation as I find myself in. Sadly, this case isn't unique. There are a lot of others who are in the same boat as I. Some have experienced even longer delays for justice and are still awaiting justice. It's not good for St Lucia.